The Tagore family was in the forefront of what we sometimes call the Bengal Renaissance. It was an exceptionally creative family. Many of its members by themselves would stand out, whether it be as writers, artists, playwrights. Almost many of them performed in their theatre. Now, both men and women were very exceptional, if you think. Of course, they are all overshadowed by two figures, Rabindranath and in painting Abanindranath. But they are not exceptions, they are simply the best in a way. And within that family, the family of Abanindranath was again very exceptional. It had three very interesting artists. Abanindranath himself, who spearheaded what we now call the Bengal School, and a very important deviation within modern Indian art. We sometimes think of him as a revivalist, but that is not really true. He was interested in reviving certain aspects of Indian art, but he was also open to influences from various other cultures, including European art and the Japanese. And as he developed, he brought all these three things together, and he was also probably one of the most intellectual of Indian modern artists. And we find the best expression of this in his Arabian Nights, where the images are not illustrations of the text, but the images are kind of parallel text to the literary source, and we have to read them against the literary text because they have so many deviations, and these deviations are very important. And the purpose of doing this was twofold. One was to narrativize his view of Calcutta, contemporary Calcutta. So although it is about Arabian Nights, actually the painting is talking about contemporary Calcutta and a Calcutta that is modernizing in a certain way. And the other aspect is, by moving away from the text in various ways, he was asserting the possibilities of articulating your own stories, which in a way the power to do that was taken away by colonialism. So what he was trying to do is to regain that power to narrate one's own stories, because in the colonial period it was always thought that the natives can't speak, the Englishman speaks for them. So Abanindranath was reclaiming that right through the Arabian Nights by producing counter narratives and deeply embedded in culture, and culture itself he recognized as having multiple registers. So within that painting you will see that sometimes there is a little bit of narrative text, and that narrative text actually is written in a hybrid language which has a completely different register from that of the painting. So these about 40-45 works which he did within all 1 year, it's a stupendous kind of creative flourish, and they mark to me the highest point in his career and very exceptional kind of work. Now his elder brother Gaganendranath was equally innovative in a very different way. If Abanindranath is associated with the revival of Indian traditions, Gaganendranath is associated with the modernism within Indian art. He also, in his own way, brought the Eastern and the Western together, but sometimes in different phases of his work. For instance, in the Chaitanya series, he has a lot of elements that comes from the Japanese woodcut traditions, the way we look at space and how three-dimensional things are flattened out, and design plays a quality in image making and all that. And on the other hand, these were followed by what we call as Cubist works. And here it's not a kind of direct imitation of Western Cubism. Actually, while what we call Cubism normally deals with problems of representation of the actual world, he uses Cubist devices to talk about the imaginary inner world, and that aspect comes through in his Cubist work. But he also brings into it his own experience with photography, his experience with theatre and creating stage sets for most of the plays in the Jorasanko theatrical world, which were when they performed there, including many plays of Rabindranath. So he brings all that into it, and his post-Cubist works, in a sense, becomes even more private. If Cubist works were looking into his inner world, the next phase of works, which is his last group of work, really is extremely personal, something that is almost totally private in a sense. Now, we don't have an example before this where an artist is kind of exploring his own private mental world as Gaganendranath does. And to that extent, it's also difficult to enter those works, analyze them, because it's a world that he alone inhabits, kind of thing. But it's a very rare example of such work, and at that point of time, really. Their sister Sunyani was also equally interesting and independent. Unlike her brothers, Abanindranath had professional training. Gaganendranath had some training, but largely self-taught. Sunyani sort of, was more, self-trained in a sense. She didn't think about becoming an artist in the professional sense. Many women within the Tagore family did study art in some way, privately at home, and painted. But nobody explored the cultural sphere of the women as much as Sunyani did. She had an access to the traditional world which was not like Abanindranath's. Abanindranath's engagement with the traditional world of Indian art was through the Mughal court art and highly sophisticated, what you might call high art within the Indian tradition. Sunyani's, on the other hand, was through the popular and regional and folk traditions. And she could imbibe that and create a world, sometimes people say naive, primitive, etc. But it is a world of a different cultural sphere in which even the more liberated women of the Tagore family lived, and she's bringing that lived experience into her work. They are much more subtler. I mean, they might not be so standardized as the works of her brothers, but they are very engaging in their own way. So when you look at this is a rare instance where you have, I mean, siblings, I mean, actually exploring different trajectories and creating a modernist, I mean, movement or art or at different planes from within the, coming from the same ambience but creating entirely different kind of work, and that is a fascinating thing.